Evil doesn't always arrive with loud warnings. Sometimes, it settles quietly through a vacant stare, a whisper only one person can hear, or a strange sensation that refuses to go away. That's how the story of Puling began. A mother in South Africa, living in a rural village surrounded by traditions, beliefs, and hidden forces. In that community, where ancestral knowledge guided daily life, the unexplainable wasn't dismissed, it was respected and feared. Spirits, healers, protection rituals, these weren't fairy tales. They were woven into the culture. But what Puling would face wasn't just a wandering spirit. It was something older, sly, and far more dangerous, a malevolent entity hidden deep in African mythology. An invisible creature that feeds on fear. A Tokoloshe. When the healer, the Sangoma, a guardian of spiritual wisdom, was called in, he expected the usual: a lost soul, a restless ancestor. But the moment he stepped inside the house, he froze. He felt it. He looked around and ran. Without saying a single word. Only silence remained and the echo of fear. That was when Puling realized her son wasn't just possessed. This was a supernatural attack of ancestral proportions. But how could something like this happen to an ordinary woman living a peaceful life in a quiet, isolated village? That's exactly what makes it terrifying. Spiritual danger doesn't always come where it's expected, and not every ritual can keep it away. Sometimes, what crosses the threshold is ancient witchcraft, born of hate and old forgotten pacts. This is a true story that leads you straight into spiritual and psychological terror, filled with myth, tension, and dread. It shows how the unknown still holds power over you, especially when it emerges from the heart of our own culture. And it reveals a chilling truth: not all evil can be seen. Some can only be felt. And by the time you feel it, it may already be too late. In the heart of South Africa, far from city noise and urban chaos, there exists a completely different reality. In a rural village, where tradition speaks louder than technology, Puling lived with her family. The connection to the land, the ancestors, and ancient customs shaped their everyday lives. There, believing in spirits and supernatural forces wasn't superstition, it was inherited wisdom, passed down through generations. Puling was a strong woman, soft-spoken and sharp-eyed. Like every mother in the region, she taught her children to respect their elders, to listen to nature's signs, and most importantly, never to mock what they couldn't see. In that traditional village, no one doubted the invisible presences that roamed at night. And everyone knew if something felt off, it was best to call a healer before it was too late. Sangoma spiritual healers held a central role in the community. They weren't just soul doctors, they were mediators between the visible world and the unseen. Puling had grown up hearing stories about possession, witchcraft, and ancestral forces. She knew that some evils couldn't be cured with medicine, only with ritual, protection, and deep faith. What she never imagined was that one day she'd have to face this inside her own home. The local culture had a clear understanding of the balance between good and evil. Ancestral spirits could help, but they could also punish. And in more severe cases, there were even darker forces, malevolent entities as old as the continent itself. People spoke of them only in whispers, afraid to draw attention. The Tokoloshe was one of them, shrouded in fear and mystery. Even with her deep cultural awareness, Puling never believed she'd live through something worthy of the stories told around the fire. But it was there, in that isolated village surrounded by mountains and silence, that her reality began to unravel. Evil didn't arrive screaming, it crept in, disguised as routine. And by the time she noticed, it wasn't just a family problem, it was a spiritual threat that endangered everything around her. It all started subtly, as if something invisible was simply watching. Puling noticed that her youngest son, Thabo, was different. It wasn't just fatigue or a change in mood. It was something deeper, quieter and unsettling. The boy no longer played like before. He would sit for hours, staring blankly into space, as if he was there, but not really there. At first, Puling thought it might be a phase, maybe something emotional, or a common illness. But Tabo's eyes were empty, like his soul had been locked behind dark glass. He spoke very little, didn't smile, and sometimes didn't seem to recognize the people around him. Puling tried to engage him, sang old lullabies, but he only stared in silence, trapped in something no one could reach. At night, the house felt different. Creaks in the ceiling, light footsteps above the straw roof, whispers coming from nowhere. One night, Puling woke up to the sound of running water, but the tap was tightly closed. Another night, she felt a weight on her chest, as if something was holding her down. She opened her eyes and saw nothing, but knew something was there. Invisible but real. As days passed, the signs grew stronger. Objects moved without explanation. Shadows appeared where they shouldn't. Even the animals seemed disturbed. The dog would stop in front of Tabo's bedroom and growl at nothing. The chickens avoided the living room window. Something was wrong. Puling didn't know what it was, but she could feel it in her bones. Tension kept building. Tabo began mumbling in his sleep, in a language Puling didn't recognize. It didn't even sound human. Sometimes, he laughed at the ceiling, as if someone was telling him jokes from beyond. What began as strange slowly became terrifying. And, as tradition dictated, when signs like these appear, the next step is clear: you call the healer. As tradition demanded, Puling didn't wait for things to get worse. She spoke with the village elders, explained Tabo's behavior and the strange occurrences around the house. The first theory was the most common one: perhaps an ancestral spirit was trying to communicate, or had been offended by something the family did or failed to do. In such cases, there was a clear path: call the Sangoma. The healer arrived silently, eyes closed for several moments as he placed his hand on the floor of the house. He carried traditional tools: rattles, sacred bones, bitter herbs, and ashes from past rituals. He began his work with prayers and ancient chants. Puling and the neighbors watched in silence. Everyone knew invisible forces were at play. The hope was that the ritual would bring peace back into the home. During the ceremony, the Sangoma cast the bones to read the signs. He performed smoke cleansing and spread protective powder in the corners of the house. At first, his expression was calm. But gradually, it shifted to tense, then frightened. He stopped in Tabo's room and stood still for long minutes. Then, without warning, he rushed out as if he had touched something he shouldn't have. "This isn't a spirit," he whispered, clearly shaken. "It's something worse." Puling was devastated. If the Sangoma Somion, deeply connected to the spiritual world, was this frightened, then what, exactly, had invaded their home? The healer refused to continue. He said he wasn't prepared to deal with what was there. Before leaving, he gave a short, chilling warning: this was summoned. And not by accident. The house, once a home, now felt like a living trap. What was once doubt became certainty. Whatever was affecting Tabo wasn't just a spirit. Something much darker had taken root there. Puling could feel if this was real, and it was spiritual. Fear turned into urgency. She needed deeper answers. She needed to understand exactly what kind of evil had crossed her doorstep. Because if even the healer backed away, the battle ahead was going to be long. After the first Sangoma fled, rumors swept through the village. Some whispered that Tabo was cursed. Others said Puling must have offended a spirit. But the truth came days later, when the healer returned, this time accompanied by an elder from the region, someone more experienced in the old rituals. The moment this second Sangoma stepped into the house, he froze. He immediately recognized what was there. And his face went pale. Tokolosh. He said the word in a low voice, but it dropped into the room like a heavy stone. Everyone nearby took a step back. The Tokolosh is a creature from African mythology, summoned through witchcraft. A malevolent being, clever, often invisible, and extremely dangerous. It doesn't just haunt, it possesses, influences, and destroys from within. And its favorite victims? Vulnerable children and fearful hearts. According to stories passed down around the fire, a Tokolosh never appears by chance. It's summon brought forth by someone with dark intentions. It could be out of revenge, jealousy, or the simple desire to cause harm. Unlike restless spirits, a Tokolosh isn't seeking peace, it seeks control. It invades the mind, corrodes the spirit, and slowly erases the essence of its victim. The more fear it senses, the stronger it becomes. Puling felt a chill crawl down her spine. If her son was under the influence of a Tokolosh, the situation was far more serious than she imagined. Cleansing the house wouldn't be enough, they would have to break the spiritual bond. Worse yet, they had to find out who had summoned it. Because in small villages, where everyone knows each other, the enemy might be disturbingly close. The new Sangoma was clear this wasn't an ordinary possession. It was spiritual warfare. The creature had already taken root in the boy and fed off the family's suffering. And now that it had been named, it could fight back more viciously than before. The air grew heavy. The warning was unmistakable, things would get worse before they got better. Because when you face a Tokolosh, it faces you right back. After that revelation, everything took a darker turn. Tabo was no longer just a quiet child, began having violent outbursts that made no sense. He spoke in strange, unknown languages, his eyes completely lifeless, as if something else had taken control of him. One night, he tried to cut himself with shards of glass. Puling screamed and cried, stopping him just in time. The boy didn't seem to feel pain, as if numbed by the entity inside him. The house became a battlefield. The walls creaked, as if something moved inside them. Puling's dreams were filled with glowing eyes, mocking laughter, and dark shapes that vanished at dawn. Sometimes, she woke up with bruises on her arms, though she hadn't hit anything. And Tabo? He drifted between long stretches of silence and bursts of terrifying violence, as if locked in a war within himself. And the worst part, the evil started to spread. Neighbors began reporting similar experiences. Children complained about figures visiting them at night. Footsteps echoed across rooftops. Couples argued for no reason. A heavy cloud of tension hung over the village. It was as if the Tokolosh had infected the entire area, poisoning it bit by bit. This invisible creature wasn't satisfied with just one victim, it wanted to take over everything around it. Puling barely slept anymore. Her eyes were sunken, her face marked by exhaustion and fear. She tried to protect Tabo, but felt she was losing the fight with each passing day. Her son was fading, being erased from the inside out. The pain of watching your child disappear in front of your eyes, it's a kind of suffering words can't describe. But Puling held on. Even in the darkest corners of psychological terror, a mother's love was her last line of defense. Knowing that the Tokolosh fed on suffering, Puling did everything she could not to show fear. But how do you stay calm when you hear voices in empty rooms, or when your child becomes someone you no longer recognize? The pressure was relentless. The witchcraft that summoned the Tokolosh had opened a spiritual wound in the village. And now, time was running out. The stronger it grew, the harder it would be to drive it out. With chaos overtaking the village and the darkness deepening inside Puling's home, it was clear they needed help beyond what they'd known. A new healer was called this time, a renowned Sangoma from a distant region, known for dealing specifically with tokoloshes and other ancient, malevolent entities from African mythology. He arrived in silence and reverence, bringing sacred amulets, ceremonial masks, and powerful ancestral symbols of protection. Unlike the others, this healer didn't show fear, but he did show respect. He explained that banishing the Tokolosh wouldn't be easy. The creature had already rooted itself in the child's spirit and in the house itself. He began preparing for a traditional exorcism, a dangerous and intricate protection ritual. He made offerings to the ancestral forces of the land, drew protective seals on the floor with sacred ash, and placed specific herbs in the corners of the home meant to lure and trap the entity. The ritual lasted all night. Puling and several villagers watched from a distance, barely breathing. During the ceremony, Tabo screamed with a voice that wasn't his. The air turned thick, heavy as if time itself had stopped. Objects flew, windows slammed violently. The Sangoma, unwavering, chanted ancient invocations, calling on spiritual powers to confront the creature. At one point, he collapsed to his knees, drained, but rose again, seemingly carried by a force greater than himself. By dawn, silence fell. The healer, pale and soaked in sweat, declared that the Tokolosh had been driven out but not destroyed. The evil had been cut from the house, but the entity still roamed. It had been summoned, and as long as the spiritual link remained unbroken, it could return. The entire village was put on alert. The witchcraft was still active. The spiritual threat had only been pushed back. Puling thanked the Sangoma, but knew her life would never be the same. Before leaving, he gave her one final warning: the Tokolosh is gone for now, but it's still looking for open doors. Guard your home. Guard your faith. With those words, he handed her a talisman made from goatskin and consecrated ash, then disappeared down the path into the forest. The evil had retreated but not vanished. With the ritual complete and the Tokolosh driven away, Puling made a difficult decision to leave the village. Even with the protection left behind by the healer, she knew that some spiritual wounds don't heal where they were opened. She moved with her family to a distant region, closer to the city, hoping to rebuild their lives far from the shadows that still haunted their old home. But Tabo's eyes, though calmer, still held echoes of what he had endured. The village was never the same. Some neighbors also moved away, while others doubled down on their protection rituals. Stories of witchcraft and supernatural attacks became more frequent and more cautiously told. The fear that the Tokolosh might return lingered in the air like a fog that never fully lifted. Everyone knew it had been summoned. And the source of that evil was still alive, still silent, perhaps still watching. In her new home, Puling worked to keep the faith alive. She began studying more about African mythology, trying to understand the forces surrounding her and how to protect her family from them. She connected with other Sangomas, learned small protection rituals, and taught Tabo how to recognize spiritual signs. The trauma had left deep scars, but it had also awakened something powerful within her: the ancestral strength of a mother who dares to face even the invisible to save her child. This story leaves us with a haunting question: what if evil isn't just a shadow that haunts, but something rooted in culture, fear, and belief? In many parts of the world, the supernatural is as real as stone and fire. The Tokolosh isn't just a myth, it represents collective fear, the weight of witchcraft, the psychological terror that can turn homes into traps. The video ends with a reflection: not all evil is just a spirit. Sometimes, it's something older. Something summoned. Something that can only be faced with courage, ancestral wisdom, and deep respect for the unseen. For many, The supernatural isn't fiction, it's daily reality. And are you prepared to face what you cannot see? This story isn't just about a terrifying creature or a supernatural attack. It invites us to look deeper into the unseen that lives alongside us every day. How often do we ignore signs, strange feelings, or subtle changes just because we believe everything must have a logical explanation? What if some answers lie in what we've stopped believing in? Peeling faced the unimaginable. But what about you? How do you handle what you don't understand? Have you sought protection? Have you respected the boundaries between the visible and the hidden? This story is a powerful reminder there are forces beyond what the eyes can perceive, and in many places, those forces aren't legends, they're realities people live with every day. So think about it. What would you do if something like this happened in your home? Would you ignore it? Doubt it? Or seek help? Would you recognize the signs of spiritual danger? And most importantly, would you be ready to face fear hidden, the way Peeling did? If this story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, we explore true accounts, ancient traditions, and the hidden side of life that many choose not to see. You never know when a story might become a warning. And sometimes, the thing that protects you is the knowledge you choose not to ignore.